Good morning.
Good morning.
How's everybody doing?
Still here.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, Richard.
Yes. Glad to be here, Charles.
Can you see me?
I can see you well.
Okay. All right. I can't see you.
Well, that's probably a good thing.
Well, no, not really, but okay. I mean, the fact is, if you look down in the bottom left-hand corner, see if your little video camera down there is turned on. Okay.
Now it's on.
Yes, there you go. I can actually see you now. Yeah. And then, good morning, Jeanette. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. I can't see you.
Well, when I get dressed.
Oh, okay. Understood.
Stop where you are.
Yeah.
Not close enough.
Yeah. This is a come as you are party, I guess. Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Good.
Anyhow, yeah, we got a couple of more minutes, before we really get started here. But it's good to see both of you online, and
Give your email address again, because you said in the other class to send the email to send in, but I didn't. I don't think I had it right, because it kept coming back, the email for the art inspiration class.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Did you receive an email from me about?
Did I get one? No, I don't think I got one from you.
Would you mind just giving your email address again, then, so
Sure.
I could?
Happily. And Richard, you might want to write this down as well. Okay. All right. It's my name, Charles, 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 and then dot, and then Scoggins, spelled SCOGINS.
1G.
Yeah, just one G. Okay. And
Capitals. Capital S.
no capitals, just all lowercase.
All okay. All right.
And then the at symbol,
Okay.
Fulton, FULTON.
Please say it again.
Fulton, FULTON.
Okay.
County, COUNTY. And then GA, as in Georgia. No spaces or anything. That's all one thing. Fulton County, GA. And then dot. And then the end part of it is gov, GOV. I know a couple of people tried to send it to me with that, it was like .org, and it won't go.
Any capitals?
No.
All
Yeah, all lowercase.
lowercase.
Yep. Okay, no
Okay.
caps.
Okay, well, I'll resend it then. At this.
Okay. Yeah, please do. Yeah, because I'd love to see, some of the stuff that you're doing. And you too, Richard. So.
I'll show you my face known as disaster.
Okay. All right. Hey, all right. So it's 11:01. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay. Now, Richard, have you been doing much with this application Zoom?
Last night was the first time I've ever been on.
Okay. So you're fairly new to this. Okay.
Very new.
All right. Okay. So what I'm going to ask from everybody is, if you're not talking, okay, I want you to go down to that lower left-hand corner and that microphone. I want you to just click on it and mute yourself. Okay. Now, if you have something to say, if you want to add something to the class, ask a question, something like that, just click that microphone, ask the question that you need to ask, and then mute yourself again. What
You
that,
always turn on the mute.
yeah, what that will do is that will help keep the background noise and stuff down to a minimum, okay? So that everybody can hear what's going on. Sound fair?
So muted if, okay.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to share a brief video that I produced. And, you know, we tried this the other day, and hopefully it will work better because I've worked on the sound aspect of it a little bit. And so I'm going to share a video, and it will take about 10 to 15 minutes, okay? And if you'll watch this, and then we'll discuss things about it, I'll be happy to answer some of your questions, things like that, okay? All right, so here we go. Good morning, and welcome to Painting and Mixed Media. My name is Charles Scoggins, and I'm the Art Education Coordinator for the Dorothy C. Benson Center. And I'm going to be teaching this class over the next 7 weeks called Painting and Mixed Media. To begin, we're going to start talking a little bit about materials and how to set your studio up at home. And I'm going to be starting a painting demo today with some inspiration that I found very close to home. So can you hear and see that? Just the
Yes,
okay.
I can.
I did some photographs, and then I did some drawings, and I'll be walking you through that whole process. And then step by step, we'll be going through the painting process from the underlying layout into the color blocking and then into the final paint stage. Okay.
Charles,
So
you aren't coming through very loud.
get started. I'm not. I'd like to talk a little bit about inspiration and where you might find it. Try to turn up the volume on your computer, Richard. Things out there, but you also have your own home, your own environment that you live in, and you know you might try doing pieces of work right now that reflect either how you're feeling and or the environment that you live in. And I would highly encourage you to do that. This little piece that I'm beginning right now is, again, just something that I happened upon, but I liked the lighting, I liked the objects that were laying there because they're interesting. And though I'm not going to try to make this a realistic, tight representational painting, what I'm really going to do with it is do something a little more fun, a little more abstract. It's kind of a reflection of being here at this place where I'm at right now in my home. And for me, pieces like this are kind of important. They're little milestones in day-to-day life, and they just give us an opportunity to play with ideas, play with techniques and approaches that we normally wouldn't time to, or even oftentimes take the time to, because we're running around doing the things that we're doing right now. So hopefully you'll enjoy this little demonstration, and we're going to get started here. As you can see, I did a thumbnail sketch just to get in the composition, the big shapes of dark and light, to begin to visualize how this canvas might be laid out, and more or less the movement and rhythm of the piece. And from there, if we go back and we look at the actual reference, and what these are is they're leaves and some of the flower pods off of a poplar tree. This time of year seems to drop these all over my deck out there. And they're really fascinating shapes. They're really interesting colors. And so, doing a painting and using some of that as a source for inspiration, seemed to be a good project. So what you're seeing me do right here is from that sketch, which you can see in the upper right-hand corner, I'm beginning to copy those shapes onto the canvas. And this is not a tight drawing by any means. It's just, big shapes of dark and light. I'm not really trying to get any detail or anything in there, but I am trying to be fairly conscientious about the size and the proportions of things that I'm putting down. Now, along the way, we're going to be talking about, different aspects while you're watching this develop. Different aspects of, how it is that you would work at home. And there's lots of questions, for all of us. Not all of us have a lot of art materials at home. Not all of us have a great north light and a big easel to work at, things like that. And so finding ways of working, you might have to improvise a little bit. Like, for example, if you don't have an easel, one of the ways that you could possibly compensate for that is to find a desk or something to work at. I would advise, if you're going to paint at it and you don't want to get paint all over your desk, then cover it either with drop cloth or maybe a piece of plastic or something like that to protect the desk. And then you can actually prop the canvas against even something as simple as a stack of books, something that's heavy that's not going to move around. And that way you can angle your canvas, to the degree that you need to be able to see it and to comfortably paint on it. And, you have a little, studio setup right there. If you have the luxury of having an easel, if you, have good light, that's all great. But, you may not. And so try to work around, try to be inventive. For lighting, natural light is probably the best source that you can use, just because the color of the light, the intensity. But, if you don't have that, then, a couple of good lamps or a well-lit room, again, could be, an answer as far as having a good place to work. With your actual brushes and things like that, I paint with a series of brushes that are graduated in size. And I really use three pretty much so basic brushes. I use flats, I use filberts, and I use Egberts. Now, the brush that you're actually seeing me work with here is what we call an Egbert. And this is a relatively small Egbert, actually. It's got a very long shaft of hair on it, which makes it very, very flexible and very sensitive to pressure at the surface of the canvas that you're working on. And that's why I really love these brushes. For me, they work very, very well. to quickly, begin to lay in shapes, and draw with, and then, fill those areas with color. Now, filberts are very much so like eggberts, except that the shaft of hair isn't that long, so they tend to be a little bit stiffer and not quite as flexible as the egbert. But you can do some wonderful work with them, and in particular, if you're painting flesh tones and portraits and figures, they work very, very well because they have that curved, rounded edge. Using the brush so that when you're making your paint strokes, you can roll the brush as you lay the paint stroke down in your fingers. And that is if you're holding it the correct way and not like a pencil. As you put the paint stroke down, you can actually blend and soften edges at the same time. And so it makes it a very, very efficient brush to work with if you want those softer transitions and edges. Now the flats are something that we've, when we work at the Dorothy C. Benson Center, I buy those because that's a good basic brush for everybody, to use, and it's a very effective brush. It's good at laying on a lot of paint onto an area. If you're like trying to fill in a big block of color or something like that, they can be very, very effective. And also, again, it's not so much the brush as learning how to use the brush. If you'll take the brush and hold it like a brush, and you'll be able to roll it, between your fingers, so that, again, you can use the full width of that flat brush, or you can use just, a small part of it. And the key brushwork is always, it's the brush head itself, but it's how you move the brush, and the amount of pressure. Some people are very heavy-handed, and they push the brush into the canvas. Others have a very light touch, and it's a more sensitive layering of the paint. And I would encourage you to work with practicing with a brush. Even if you're not doing finished paintings, things like that, just play with it. See what you can do with it. How can you get it to make different marks? Rolling the brush in your fingers, as you're making a paint stroke. The amount of pressure that you use, try to be very light-handed, and then, contrast that with, very strong, very direct marks with the brush. And as you work with it, you'll begin to get more sensitivity about what you can do with that brush, how it takes paint, and will, apply it to that canvas for you. Every one of you will have different experiences, with brushwork. One of the things that really make a difference between us, as painters, is how we handle that brush and how the mechanics of our hand work. It's something, though, that, if you're not happy with the way you handle the brush, things like that, over time, with practice and, more working, with it and being conscious of how you're using the brush, that can improve. That's one of the things that you can, over time, work on and get much better with. Okay. Now, as you can see, the painting that I'm working on, it's beginning to develop, beginning to get all those dark shapes in. I've pretty much got the composition laid at this point. And, from here, we'll move into putting in color blocks, beginning to assign these lighter spaces different values. So we begin to get a sense of things moving either forward or backward. Now, one of the things I like about this composition, one of the reasons that I laid it out the way it was, is that there's a lot of overlapping shapes. You know, one thing moving in front of or behind another. That to me is always an interesting process and device to begin to set up depth in the painting from the very beginning. And any opportunities that you can get to overlap and break into shapes, it always makes it a much more interesting painting. One of the things that we probably don't talk enough about is how do you design a composition? And you know, using overlapping shapes to begin to create those layers, whether you're doing a landscape or you're doing a still life, is always a good way to you know, bring some of that underlying design into the piece. Right? So that's it for now. And I'll be seeing you in a live Zoom meeting here very soon. And I look forward to it. And thanks a lot for listening. What'd you think? Let's see, unmute some of you. Anybody got anything to say about that?
So basically, you did a sketch first of the whatever you know that you would like to have that you
Right.
want to paint at some point.
Mhm.
And then you went to you took that sketch and then you used your brushes to put that on the canvas, and so that's your beginning of the actual well the painting. So I guess so. You mentioned that you used the flat, and you said the silvers and apron brushes. Is that what you said?
No. It's flats,
Huh?
filberts.
Oh, filbert. Oh, I understand. Filbert.
Yeah, filbert.
Okay. I thought you said
And
silver.
then the last brush that I was, well, the one that you were actually seeing me use is called an Egbert.
Okay.
Okay.
Spell that?
Hey, Richard.
How do you spell that word?
Egbert?
Egbert?
Yeah, Eggbert. Egbert.
That's a brush.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now to lay that out, Charles, you were using what were you using? I know you weren't using black paint, but what
No.
were you using to do that with? What color?
I was using oil paint, and I was using a mixture of paint at that point. Mainly, it was raw umber, and I added some Viridian green to it.
Oh, okay.
Now, you know, you know what you use to lay it out with is just a dark color.
Okay.
If you're working in oil. Okay, now I see John is online, and he's working in watercolor, and it's a rather different process with
Right.
painting, and painting being oils, acrylics,
Yeah.
wash, any kind of media that's opaque or you can get to be opaque, that's painting. Okay, now watercolor is again something often all on its own, because it's more like drawing in the sense that you build from that light paper and you build up the darks. Okay.
Okay.
And so you know, it's a slightly different process. You know, with the painting, you're trying to get the darks in, and then you're laying the lights on top of it and building toward the light. With watercolor and drawing, you're starting with that white paper and you're beginning to build up the darks, and you'll start off generally fairly light in value, and then you'll keep getting darker, you know, and building up those strong shapes.
Does the technique of you different ways of use the brush, turning it and things like that, will that still work with watercolor?
It will. Okay, now with watercolor, and you know, different people work with it differently. Some people work with the watercolor paper not flat, you know, angled or upright, and they don't mind the drips and the runs and things like that that you're going to get with it. You know, that to them, that's kind of part of the nature of the medium.
Right.
If you're kind of a tight representational watercolorist, then you're probably going to work with the paper flat, and so you're going to hold it more, you know, you're going to hold it a little bit differently than you would an easel brush, because the brushes are not as long. And here, I'll show you some examples. Okay, this is an Egbert. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, it's got a very long shaft of hair, and this is for painting an easel. Okay, and the way you hold the brush is if you open up your hand, okay, and you place the brush across your fingers. Okay, like that, and just put your thumb on top of it. See, then you're holding the brush like you're going to paint with it at an easel. And why this works is, you see, you can take your thumb and you can just roll the brush. So you can use as much of the head of that brush or as little as you want, depending on the amount of pressure that you're putting on it and how you're rolling the brush. Now, if you're working at, you know, a tabletop and you're, you know, doing a watercolor, then you're going to hold the brush slightly differently. And I don't have a short-handled designer brush here, which is what you paint with watercolor, but I'll try to use this large flat brush and give you an example. So, you know, you're going to hold it, you know, again, in a kind of a similar fashion, okay? But you're going to be letting it angle downward. And again, you know, you can just with the turning of your thumb, again, begin to use that brush in a lot of different ways than if you hold it like a pencil like this. See, with a pencil, you know, you can roll it a little bit, but you have, you know, limited range, all right? If you, and you in particular, John, there's probably some videos on YouTube from different watercolors, but one of the ways that you should, or one of the things you should probably look at, is look at, in particular, Japanese videos and Japanese watercolorists, and how they do sumi, okay, which is both calligraphy and painting, but the way that they hold the brush is a really effective way of working flat, you know, with a water media, okay? And they get some beautiful results.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Okay, all right. Anybody got any more questions about the video, comments, things like that? We're also quiet this morning, come on, let's. Okay, now I wanted to talk a little bit about the media or the surface that I was working on, okay? And let's see. Okay. Share that on the screen. Okay. Everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So what this is this is a linen panel. Okay. And that linen panel is something that I made. It's just stretched over a piece of foam core. And I used acrylic mixed, heavy gel, and painted that board, embedded that linen onto the surface, and then wrapped the corners around it, and did the same thing on the back so that it's tightly glued down. And, you know, you don't have to work, you know, on linen. You don't have to work on canvas. You know, you can really paint on a lot of different things, including like, you know, the back of drawing pads, things like that. And particularly for things like experimental works, you know, things that you're just playing with, different ideas, things like that. You know, you don't have to go out and spend a lot of money, you know, to, you know, have surfaces and things to work on. Even if you had a piece of plywood at home, you know, you could easily take some acrylic paint or something, you know, paint it out a couple of times, and even take sandpaper and, you know, sand it back to smooth the surface a little bit before you paint on it. And you know, you could make yourself, you know, some nice little painting panels there to work with, and you'd be amazed at how well they work. If you can't get out to the store and get a canvas, things like that, you know, it's not really any big problem. You know, you can create a lot of different painting surfaces to work with. Another thing you might want to consider too is working on paper. Um, if you have pads of watercolor paper, if you have pads of, and particularly they've come out with what they call mixed media paper, you can also paint on that as well. And you can use oil, you can use acrylic, you can use watercolor, you can draw on it, you can do all kinds of different things with it. So it gives you a lot of different options, okay? All right. Anybody got any questions?
When you're using oil, do you prefer a textured sort or smooth?
Yeah, with oil paint and generally even with acrylic, I like a hard surface, you know, something that's not going to give me a lot of flexibility or a lot of give in the surface. I want something that when I put the brush on it, that you know, I actually feel the contact with that surface. Now, you know, because of that, I tend to work on what we call painting panels rather than just stretch canvases. And a lot of times I'll make my own panels. And the reason that I use linen instead of canvas is, again, it's got a bit of a toothier surface so that when the paint goes down on it, it grabs more paint, you know, and it doesn't slide around a lot. You actually feel the surface, you know, of that panel while you're putting, you know, the paint on it. And that's, you know, again, you know, everybody's a little bit different.
Right.
You might like that canvas surface better. And so, you know, experiment, you know, try some different things. In your case, doing watercolor, you can have like either a very smooth surface or you can have a very rough surface, because watercolor paper comes in a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, just, you know, your standard watercolor papers. Like I said, there's mixed media papers. And again, different mixed media papers have different textures or different tooths to them. And so again, the way they take the paint can be very different. Okay, you just kind of have to experiment around and find the one that you really like. Now, in doing water media, because when I was doing a lot of illustration work, I would use either what we call Dr. Martin's dyes, which are very bright but very transparent media. But also, you know, I would use watercolor from time to time. And the surface that I really liked working on was that Strathmore had what they call a double weight watercolor illustration board. And I really like the surface on that. It's, again, it's a hard surface, so it's not real flexible. And I just like the way that it took the color and how the color spread on it. And the nice thing was with watercolor is that the grain of it was tight enough that if I wanted to go back in with a brush and a little bit of water, I could go back in and actually pick up color off of the surface and lift. So if I got something a little too dark, I could go back in and rework it. And it held up well. Occasionally watercolor papers, if you get them too wet and overwork them, they'll start, getting like little, the paper will start peeling up. Well, I didn't have to worry about that with that strap watercolor paper. It took a lot of abuse. so you could go back in and work on it, different times.
Yeah, I had a Strathmore, but I'm not sure if it was a double weight. What I had, I have to go check and see what weight the paper was.
Yeah, I like their products. They make and particularly mixed media watercolor boards, things like that. They make really good products, and they hold up well. And they can be, they can be a little bit expensive. If you go out and you buy one of the big sheets, I think it's about $40. But you're talking about I think it's like a 30 by 48 sheet. And then you can take that and you can cut it down. Yeah. And usually when I'm doing like water media, watercolor, because I know it's going to go under a piece of glass, what I'll do is I'll cut it down to the size of the frame that I have. And then I'll inside of that, piece, I'll mask off an area that I'm going to work within. So I leave myself border or a mat.
Right.
And then I'll just lay a mat over it. Okay. And, it's a nice clean way of working. You get a nice finished product that way. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else?
Can you go over that part again about handling the brush, like, how you can, because I use acrylic. That's what I started with, and so I'm kind of stuck with that. So, but sometimes trying to get the result, can be a challenge.
All right. So what I'm going to do is, if you can see me clearly, all right, I'll try to keep my hand up. All right. So if you open up your hand, and all you have to do is lay the brush across your hand, okay? And then put your thumb on top of it, okay? Now, depending on what's more comfortable with you, whether you hold the brush, further up the shaft, I tend to hold it down here at the bottom, okay? And that's because I'm working at an easel. Okay? I'm not working flat. I'm actually working with, the angle of the painting is usually vertical, okay? And so, then I can reach out and I can make paint stroke. And as I do that, I can use my whole arm, okay? Is that
Yeah, that's helpful, yeah.
Okay, all right. Now, one of the problems that I see, in a lot of people who are beginning to paint is many of you try to get too close to the easel, okay? And that can be another thing that works against you. If you hold that brush, okay, and then you reach out, you should just be able to touch the surface of that canvas with the end of your brush. If you're real close to it, you're not going to be able to have the sensitivity, to put the pressure on that canvas. So that limits the way that you can use the brush. So just step back. One, you'll be able to see the painting better, okay? And number two is you'll find that you can be a lot more sensitive with that brush if you're not too close, okay? Now, Jeanette, do you stand or do you sit when you paint?